There we go.
Hey, Charlotte, you are our one attendee. Yay!
So there'll be lots of people that watch this.
Yeah. And we're looking forward to there's those beautiful pauses and those beautiful transitions at the beginning. So hi Charlotte, you're wonderful because you're our one attendee, but as Ellie put it, we are doing this for Chronically Awesome's, also their Patreon account and for their website. So if you subscribe, you'll be able to access our training workshop today. We're going to be focused on the parallels that run between our two communities, the neurodiverse community and the chronic illness community. First off, Ellie, do you want to introduce Chronically Awesome?
Yeah, so we are, well, first of all, I'm Ellie. I'm the founder and CEO of Chronically Awesome, also a chronic illness sufferer myself, as most of the team are. I think all of the team are chronic illness sufferers or have close family who are themselves. I set us up to support people like us, mostly from my personal experience, that there just wasn't the services out there when we're told that we have a diagnosis that we're going to live with for the rest of our lives. We're told that we need lifestyle adjustments, but those are very rarely actually supported or provided. So we've started with exercise videos and these workshops, hoping to expand soon into a mental health provision. So yeah, like we're still really little, really new, and we work very much at our own pace just because we are all chronically ill, and so things get done when we get them done. But I think hopefully it means that we're really grounded in what our community needs and wants. So that's basically who we are. And this is a part of a series of workshops. We've already had several on things like sleep and pacing. Our last one was a really great one on journaling, and we've got more to come on things like relaxation, diet, breathing, and how important and how we can use breathing. So yeah, hopefully we'll see people in subsequent workshops.
Thanks, Ellie. So my name is Reannon. As you've seen on some of the posts, I'm the founder of Hidden Capacities. We're relatively new. We set up in November last year. That was off the back of my own personal experiences. I am neurodiverse myself. I have dyslexia. I also experience visual stress. But it also was born out of being a part of the neurodiverse community since I was 16, in terms of also working and coming from a background of education or social care. I can see how many barriers and how many inclusion difficulties we can face on a daily basis. Yeah. We do creative workshops, but we also do scholarship awards, their individual scholarship awards and their group scholarship awards. And it's about looking at what a neurodiverse coexistence looks like. So this space where we all process differently, but there is a space that we can all be able to be ourselves, and what that looks like. Part of being ourselves is giving ourselves permission. So for example, if you look at me today, I'm not sitting on a chair. I know about myself that I am better in terms of like my memory recall and concentration and focus if I am able to move. I might transition at some point onto another space, but it's about giving myself that full permission and about giving ourselves that full permission. Part of the gifts that can be associated with neurodiversity are looking at things from a different perspective and how that can influence our levels of creativity. So I wanted to start the workshop with a spoken word poem. Again, it's the idea that if we're going to be ourselves, then we're going to truly and really authentically be ourselves. Coexisting and co-learning of how we are so potent as individuals and within our vast tribes. Rare and extraordinary, our inner hidden adversities we can so well share or hide. Striving to thrive, striving to just survive. Striving for our pains and our gifts to be finally seen and recognised. To be washed with real system change. As this time indicates, this is no longer about awareness, but a shift to acceptance. System change which doesn't just create services with more humanity, potency and healing, but an envisioned accessibility that transforms everything for us all. Where our collective subtleties are beginning to coexist, are now being spoken about, felt, explored and fully realised. Seen so that the world we cry out for, that world we discuss, that world we dream, comes closer to our reality and starts to restart and transforms accounts of injustice, which can be beyond harsh and obscene. Whether you are currently in pain, currently in the midst of anxiety or depression, whether you experience this moment as bliss with curiosity, or even not really sure why you are actually here, welcome. Together we can establish our needs, not just in this very instance, but continue to unfold within and around us, way beyond the bounds of a 2-hour workshop, unearthing some truths about ourselves that not only support us as individuals, but as our communities as a whole. For we are warriors. Some I know feel an absolute distaste and disgust at that word. But warriors endure, and we endure a world of systems together that historically and often still struggle and fail to understand us. So whether we wear who we are invisibly, quietly, or loudly, always use your own discernment wisely. Choose what you want to take away from this experience today and what you wish to discard. Choose what you want to share and when. Our individual uniqueness means our own inner compass must be well established within us and not jarred. Not jarred by what others think, not jarred by preachy, unsolicited advice. Instead, let's co-create a space where we listen to ourselves, feel into what makes sense to each of us, letting our own knowing, own bodies, own minds state to us what could be our possible well-being plight. If well-being means a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy, do we really think that someone else would know what that land looks like and feels like for us? Or do we need to be the ones who co-create and inspire what well-being actually means to us? Let's start right here and now. Let's not wait. We invite you to give yourself 10 minutes to process these words, perhaps. Or more importantly, take a beautiful, unexpected pause. How novel, right, to be offered this at the beginning. Ask yourself this: what do I need? Do you need a coffee, water, a herbal tea? Simple things like needing the toilet, maybe. Do you need to answer one more call, one more text, one more email, so that your mind and focus can be more present? Do you need to reposition the light or your body physically, adjust the volume or height of your screen? Grab a charger maybe. Lay down or move and feel more free just to be. Do you need to go outside? Grab a pen or run and hide. Hide from this workshop if it's become overwhelming, or you need some more processing time, why not? It's being recorded for you, right? Go ahead, be completely authentic. You truly get to decide. Be your own influence. Ask yourself what your well-being really needs. When the 10 minutes is up, we'll be back together and you will see and be embraced by the visuals of trees. For those of you who decide to come back, we just have Charlotte. Charlotte, don't feel pressured if you don't want to come back and you want to watch this as a recording. Our own unique path to being we can weave and unpick. Charlotte, as you're the only individual that's on this call, and Ellie, do you want to take those 10 minutes or do you want to go?
I'm all right.
How do you feel, Ellie?
Yeah, I'm happy to carry on.
Okay, so neurodiversity was first coined by Judy Singer, and it was in 1998. And looking at the trees, they're just so beautiful. And if you look at a forest, it would be a really bizarre concept to go, one tree is healthy and the rest are abnormal. So saying, for example, the oak tree is the healthy one. The oak tree is the healthy one in the forest, and we all need to aspire and be like the oak tree. And the rest to be considered unhealthy in some way or shape or form. But that's what we've done historically in terms of society and with our brains. And neurodiversity has completely shifted that. Neurodiversity looks at the idea that actually, if you look at the forest, it's beautiful, it's stunning. Look at its vast difference. We're also going to be focused on acquired neurodiversity. So the idea that within neurodiversity, I'm going to take a drink. Being about well-being and self-care. Also within neurodiversity, there is a section within that that's recognised that people can acquire characteristics of neurodiversity. So that could either be, for example, recognised as, like, for example, a brain injury, where that affects processing and sensory information. But there is also these kind of fluctuations that happen. So, for example, when people have a chronic illness, they can describe experiences and processing differences that you would associate and link with regards to neurodiversity. What's interesting is that there are so many similarities in regards to neurodiversity and chronic illness. And one of the things that I noticed when working with people that are neurodiverse is that it can be very common for people that are neurodivergent to also have a diagnosis of a chronic illness or multiple chronic illness. Now, I've never done this in terms of research and recorded this, so I cannot say to you it is this percentage, it's that percentage, but it was always a situation where I wasn't surprised if somebody was neurodivergent and then also had a chronic illness. So looking at the similarities that our communities have, and I want to look at and explore these because I think this really opens up that space where we can be co-learning from one another in terms of well-being strategies. So the first one is the fact that it's hidden. When you look at a human being, you can't see the fact that what type of processing that they have or how they're processing information, either from a sensory point of view or how they think. So for example, when you look at me, you wouldn't be able to tell that I was predominantly a pictorial processor. That's not something, when you look at Reannon, you can go, right, Reannon predominantly processes in pictures. The fact that these things are hidden can create a lot of difficulties in terms of other people understanding that those differences are even there. Ellie, for the hidden part, is there anything that you wanted to add, or are you happy?
No, I'm happy.
What's also interesting about both of our communities is that we can have such varying difficulties in terms of diagnosis. So this can look at anything from misdiagnosis, battle to get diagnosis. And there's also a percentage of people that don't actually want a diagnosis, that it can be something that for whatever reason, they find either a hindrance, or they are looking out to professionals when they're told, or by others told, that I think you should get a diagnosis, that they say, this is me, this is who I am. That's definitely the case in terms of like the neurodiverse community. You can come across that a lot, where people are in a situation where they might have had lots of different professionals or lots of different people that they're around wanting them to have a diagnosis or go through a diagnostic process, but that's not something that they want as individuals. Our experiences are so vast and so different, so trying to capture that vastness into words, it can be difficult, but those journeys between our communities are certainly there. Is there anything you wanted to add to that one, Ellie?
No, I think, you know, a recognition that the journey to diagnosis can be really harmful and really damaging, and that there can be a really like mixed set of feelings when you get to that diagnosis, because you can feel real relief that you finally have a label and you know you can understand fully what is happening to you, but that quickly passes and you can experience fear or trepidation about what's coming next. But we rarely look back and say, actually, that was a really difficult process to get to this point. I know my first diagnosis took 10 years. And, you know, I didn't really, there was never a suggestion that I might need any sort of support for kind of where I'd come from, where I was at the point of diagnosis and what might come next. And just that journey can be really difficult, and that should be recognised more, I think.
With me, it was quite a fight once I finally was diagnosed to get hold of like my educational psychology report. So I always wanted to be able to see that, because in my mind, I thought they'd be the keys to help me understand why I had struggled so much. And what was interesting is when I finally got given that report, and the reason, by the way, that they didn't give that was they found that because it contained a lot of medical model language, that when young people were accessing that, they became upset or became quite distressed by the information that they were looking at, that wasn't something that was deemed good for their well-being. That's why it was a struggle to get a hold of that information in the first place. But also interestingly, what I found out from that report is I'd also been like secretly diagnosed. So it was one of my parents, my mum, that was very adamant that she was noticing these signs, that she believed I had dyslexia, but it was just she wasn't supported in that. She was seen as like an overprotective, an overprotective mother, and it was quite a journey. It still is, really. There's still a lot of discovery there. Statistically as well, we are also likely to experience inclusion barriers, both of our communities. So that's not just even in terms of being able to access things like education, employment, and basic healthcare. Sometimes that's not even when we're actually there at those services, we can struggle to even get to those services in the first place. And there are things that are changing, which I'll talk about later, which is wonderful. But at the minute, it's just focusing on those similarities and parallels. The other one is that we are at higher risk of burnout. So if I take myself with the tendency for high empathy, I can have periods where I really need to be looking after my well-being, being away from social interaction, and being able to have those spaces that are nurturing and restorative. I had personal experience of a physical and mental burnout in 2016, which was also around not being able to have access to reasonable adjustments that worked as well. So there are these situations where we can experience burnout, not just because of our processing or our diagnosis, but sometimes also the difficulties that can come when we're trying to access the support that we need. Ellie, what I'll do is, rather than keep stopping, if you want to add anything, just say. So the other part is that within our communities, you can have two people that have exactly the same diagnosis, but could be experiencing that diagnosis and what they need in completely different ways. And you can have 3 people, 4 people, you can have 1,000, you can have 1,000,000. There is within our communities a recognition that even though we can have the same diagnosis, our experience of what that looks like and our responses to strategies or our responses to things around us can be so different. Also, we can be in a situation where we're using multiple strategies in terms of managing our well-being or managing the impact of just living from day to day. That does also interlink in terms of like our risk of burnout, because you can imagine, you won't need to imagine, but as you can imagine, being able to choose or not choose to have these different strategies that support you to feel comfortable in situations, or to be able to cope with life, or be able to access services or systems, it can be incredibly exhausting. It is exhausting. So another similarity within our communities is the fact that to survive and thrive, we need people that go beyond our diagnosis. We need people around us that can see us for who we are, not this concept of we've become half a person because they're interacting with a part of us that they think is, oh, you have dyslexia, so I'm stereotyping that this is your experience, and I'm stereotyping that this is what goes on for you. And there is a real shift in culture, which is not only looking at the difficulties of what we experience, but also looking at the things that are really exceptional and beautiful about ourselves as individuals and our communities. Like, for example, I'll mention again, having incredibly high empathy. Again, that's not a one thing in terms of a stereotype, it's just picking one as an example. Fluctuation is incredibly, massively correlates between our communities, and it's one of the biggest things, or in my view, one of the biggest things that I think people find it hard to get their heads around, that 1 minute you can, so say for example with the fluctuation for me, 1 minute I can be able to spell quite complex words, be able to not have memory recall difficulties when asked a question, can be able to recall it like that. And in just an instance, that can all change. And in just an instance, that can all change again. And an instance. A lot of people can have anxiety and difficulties just about fluctuation, just about not knowing the uncertainty of when they're going to have difficulties in terms of their processing. Also, what's really interesting is that with our fluctuation, it can really mislead others around us, like not purposely, but it can look very inconsistent to an outsider, because an outsider could go, I don't get it. Yesterday you were able to do this, so why can't you do it now? Or why can't you do it in that second? And it was really interesting listening to a conversation that Ellie and Charlotte were having about when going to different places, that you can sometimes be accused of being overly looking too healthy, or looking too like you've got everything together. And then if you aren't in that space, that is the case, and that you really go into the difficulties, that people can accuse you of being a hypochondriac and not really empathizing and relating. It's really tricky. Also, I think this is really important. Our idea of what success looks like can be so incredibly different from mainstream culture. This sometimes mainstream sort of tick boxes of what success looks like can sometimes be inaccessible, or can sometimes be rejected. Things that we look at, or if I own it my stuff and I look and I go, actually, I don't really want to do that because I'm not really interested in that. But if I look over there, yeah, I'm interested in that instead. And looking at lots of blogs from people that are chronically, from the chronically ill community, it was so interesting looking at the shifts in different language in terms of sort of goal setting, and always having photos posted where everything is, you know, looking okay and is just exact, and people expressing that actually, when it is New Year, do we really want to be setting ourselves all these different goals that we don't know what things are going to be like for us today, let alone tomorrow, let alone in a year's time? So I believe that we have that in common, that where our where our interests and where our focus is in terms of success, that can just look so different. I mean, it's an interesting concept in itself, because the idea of success is pretty subjective, but we have that as a similarity within our communities. And also, we're not a one-size-fits-all community, and any of you that saw the Instagram post earlier before this workshop, it's a really tricky it's something that I think we could be really learning so much from each other about, because if we admit, or if we really look into and go, right, okay, actually, it's not just a small minority of human beings that need systems that allow for complexity, or that need systems that allow for something that's not so simplistic. And we really own that, and we see that has the potential to just really change and innovate our systems. So, for example, looking at health systems, for example, that focus on one area of specialism, but then if you have 3 areas of specialism that you need, but you only have one consultant in a certain department, that you then can't interlink, and you then can't ask questions for about a health decision. I mean, potentially every human being could benefit from a more holistic system, not just us as a community. There's also a lot of information out there about gaslighting. So we're talking about the idea and the shift away from not just awareness of neurodiversity, or not just awareness of chronic illness, but an acceptance. So sometimes what can happen in terms of awareness building is that information can be taken, and then it can be used against people. And it's really tricky sometimes to kind of spot gaslighting and the harm that can do for 4 and 2 in individuals. Identifying these things and talking about them, again, it kind of brings it to the forefront in terms of having ways of being able to deal with that. Also, there can be a tendency sometimes when you're different in some way or shape or form that people around you can pseudo-diagnosis. So start thinking, all right, well, I've noticed this about, I'm going to not pick on you, Ellie, but I've noticed this about Ellie, and I've also noticed this about Ellie, and I've Googled about this, and I think Ellie's got that, and I think that's why she's behaving in this way or that way. And you can become medicalized not only by medical systems, but you can become medicalized by people that are, you know, it's sad, but are there to, you know, sometimes in relationships where there's meant to be love, where there's meant to be understanding, but there can be situations where there is more, you know, more stigma and more pseudo-diagnosis based on, I guess it's misinformation. We can also, both our communities experience difficulties with minimizing and not believing the difficulties and not believing the strength. So if I looked at the neurodiverse community, so if you've read and looked out, or if you know personally about the spiky profile, so the idea that we can have above average strengths and abilities beyond what is seen within the average human being, but we can also have difficulties as well. Now, if people can see the strengths, then sometimes they can really, really struggle to believe that we have difficulties. That focus is just there on the strengths. But similarly, if we're around people that are constantly seeing the difficulties that we have, then they can sometimes struggle and believe that we have extraordinary and above average gifts to be able to bring and give. Also, again, because of the fact that if things are hidden from people, you know, it's not culturally acceptable for me to have to walk around with my diagnosis papers and prove to people that I have difficulties in you know, in certain areas. And it's something that minimizing, I've just seen it a lot on Instagram, where people are saying, if somebody's opened up to you and told you about the fact that they're neurodivergent, that's a really amazing position to be in, because they've trusted you. And it's the same if somebody has trusted you with a health diagnosis, that you're in a really privileged, I guess, it's a position that it means that there's a level of trust. Ellie, is there anything that you want to add to those?
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of minimizing or not believing difficulties and strengths, I think with fluctuation, we can start to doubt ourselves as well. Like, so my NJ tube failed on Friday, and on Saturday, so I had to switch back to eating normally inverted commas, and I did quite well on the Saturday, and in that time, despite, you know, needing the tube and having it placed, despite vomiting every day for 3 months before getting it, I was like, maybe I never needed that tube. Maybe the doctors were just humoring me. And in that sense, like, I, you know, gaslit myself, which I think is a really common problem. I can be like, well, you know, maybe it's not that bad. And that stems partly from a coping strategy, particularly for me. I'm like, you know, when doctors aren't helpful, you kind of start telling yourself, well, maybe it's not that bad. Like, maybe I can just carry on like this, because that's essentially what you've been told to do. And like, my husband sat me down and was like, no, remember how ill you were that week you went into hospital, and the second time you went into hospital, like, doctors would never have placed a tube if you didn't need it. And, you know, a couple of days later, I'm back to vomiting everything I put in myself. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I do need that tube. I cannot sustain myself eating regularly, but for that short time I minimized my needs and my difficulty, and it didn't, no one else at that particular time was minimizing what I needed. But it stems from fluctuation, it stems from being gaslit so much, you start gaslighting yourself. And I think a little bit of sort of survival mechanisms. And so, yeah, it's not always external. I think sometimes, I don't think I'm the only one that sometimes minimizes what I need and you know, don't recognize necessarily, because things can drag on and your sort of perception of what is normal gets skewed. I sometimes forget that not everyone is sick every day. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is completely abnormal. That yeah, like sometimes it's kind of, sometimes people can also help remind you of where you're at and your strengths and your weaknesses. And something I really value about my friendship with Reannon is that like she just reminds me that I have, like, my experiences bring value, and that the person I've become because of those experiences has a value. So yeah, like that's just what I wanted to add.
It's really helpful. It made me think of like with like colorimetry, with Ms. Erling, with stopic, I can't say that word, so I'm not going to give it a try. I'm going to say visual stress instead. So accessing computers and reading, I was constantly experiencing washout of words where they would just blur and would be blinking and blinking, trying to get that back into focus. And at the time I thought it was because I was studying and maybe my eyes were tired, and nothing was coming up in terms of mainstream opticians, but I was made aware about colorimetry, about lenses, and it changed the like frequency of headaches. So then didn't have headaches, it increased reading speed. And what's interesting with this, and we'll have like some resource links, is that I know that that's increased my reading speed. I know that that's stopped me having these migraine headaches. I know that I enjoy reading more because of these. There's so many benefits that I experience, but it can be really difficult in terms of like doubting yourself when you go into a situation and you have maybe a professional or a friend or a family member say, oh yeah, I read a lot of research about those, and you do know they're just placebo. You do know they don't actually work. And it's that feeling of like trusting that steadfast. But I guess also I can relate to that, where you're kind of then saying, Ellie, that situation of gaslighting yourself, because it's then like would have those moments of doubt of like, okay, is it all in my mind? Is this not really what was interesting is when I got these, talking to the person that fitted them, and she had a very similar, it was an assistant who had a very similar opinion that they were just placebo, but she'd heard the testimonies again and again and again of different people that it supported, that she just said, I can't really be in a position anymore where and the reason why I'm sharing that is sometimes if we get into this space, which is really about science and what is gleaned from and people's experience in terms of a measurable way, colorimetry and neuroscience is really, really interesting to follow and look at, because the neuroscience and the experiences that people are having are showing that it changes brain activity, and that people are talking about all these different benefits that they have. But in some situations it's being discredited because we're almost experiencing too many benefits, too many vast benefits of what colorimetry is doing, to the point that then can be seen as something that is not valid, which is, I think, a really, really interesting point to raise, because in terms of our communities, one strategy for several different people can have lots of different outcomes and lots of different benefits. So moving on to the fact that we don't fit into these simple systems, we don't fit into usually these tick box exercises or these tick box activities. In terms of a well-being workshop, I was really keen not to fall into that same trap. And yay! the idea that we kind of come on a workshop and someone goes, right, I've tried this and it was really amazing and it had this impact on me, and if you just do these 5 simple things, your life and your work, you know, well-being is going to be absolutely amazing. Now, I'm not discrediting people that bring that type of information to the world, because it's wonderful and we can glean a lot of inspiration from it, and that can be adapted, or it can be used. And I'm going to take that off screen because that's just so much going on. So usually in advice and strategies, they don't always take into account the fact that we might have a chronic illness, or that we might be neurodivergent, or both, and that things might need to be adapted, or that one strategy just doesn't cut it. Like we said, it's not a one size, you know, not one strategy fits all process. So instead, what this workshop's going to look at is just considering practical tips, so practical tips that you can look at and go, right, is this something that I think is actually going to work for me? So part of this workshop is about owning and having that experience of like how our own judgment and our own discernment of what would work. So the first practical tip that can be useful is having a curiosity about who you are, and curiosity about what your unique well-being needs can look like. So if I give an example of what we, in terms of me and Ellie, or Charlotte, you're welcome to join in, but there's no pressure with that. When you have a high curiosity about yourself, the rewards can be great. So the biggest, I would say, I'm just going to use the word game changer, because that's what that was for me, in terms of curiosity. So I had to do a law exam, and I had learned all of these articles for my exam, felt really confident, knew about myself that I need was a visual process. So instead of having a list to prompt me, I had a really beautiful spider diagram in front of me. I had music, and I had been learning all these different articles and all these different things that I wanted to say, wandering and walking around. And when it came to my law exam, how it was set up was everybody was sitting down. Everyone was sitting at a chair, everyone was sitting at a table. Now, what I found in that moment, even though I had my spider diagram, even though I had rehearsed and given so much energy into that exam, nothing was coming to me. Nothing came. And I was curious about the fact that it had been done through movement, but also there was something inside of me that knew, Reannon, get up, and get up and move. You're not going to remember anything just sitting there. And so I got up, I wandered, I moved, and I could remember so much. I could remember so many articles. Now, sadly, again, this isn't about blame, but I hadn't known about myself that I needed wandering and that I needed movement as an exam concession. I didn't know about that about myself. But now I know it now as a neurodivergent person. It is life-changing. So within the studio that I've got, there's loads of different spaces for me to transition. So I give myself full permission to move. You're currently on a standing desk, but also to aid my memory if I want to move. I've got spaces where I can transition. Now, what that does for me, it's like pressing a reset button. So if I reach a point where I start to feel I can't concentrate anymore, I can't focus, I just do a reset. I just do a transition from one space to another. That reward was gained from being curious about myself, but also was gained because I listened to what that instinct was telling me. And I guess it's really difficult sometimes, because in a lot of cultures, not all cultures, it can be really difficult to trust those kind of gut instincts, or being able to give ourselves permission to do things that are not seen as the norm of what is expected in that situation. Also, it's been interesting about being curious about asking and talking to other people that know me really well, that I trust. So one of the processing differences that was getting in the way sometimes with regards to my communication was that if you imagine like processing a whole picture, which is a big picture, taking it down into words and having a conversation, what could often happen and still happens, I'm quite accepting of it, is that I can start a conversation at the second and third sentence because all my context is there. I've got it, but you as an outsider that I'm talking to, you don't have that information. What was really helpful in terms of being open and being curious about asking those questions is that then I can do something with that information. So I can then either go, well, I fully accept myself that sometimes there's going to be misunderstandings in communication, and that's just one of those things. I'm just going to accept that. Or I can look at that and go, is there a strategy? Is there something that I can do? So if I am in a situation where I really want to be understood, I have options. One of the things that I was prompted to or advised that I could do to help with that, if you are a picture thinker, to slow things down and give context, is describe things. So describe partly what you're seeing, or describe a bit more context first so that other people can be on the same page in terms of conversation. Now, this is another reason why no one strategy is good for everybody, and also why being curious and having conversations with other people can be really helpful. So I had a conversation with a person that I had been not using that strategy with in terms of like being purposeful, just really getting into the flow of what that looked like. And they turned around and said, Reannon, I'm finding you really patronizing at times. And they said that, you're describing things to me that I know what that is, and I know what this is. And I was just like, wow. I mean, I'm so sorry. That was never the intention that I wanted to have. And then in that moment, I felt comfortable to share with them and trusted them that I could share my process. And I just said, this is how I process. This is a strategy that has been given to me. And the outcome was that we both laughed at that situation. But I think it's a really important part of using our discernment with strategies or advice that people give, because they're not always a cure-all situation or supports all situation. And yeah, Ellie, is there anything that you want to share that when you've been curious about yourself, like a particular event or something that's happened that you think, yeah, that's reaped a benefit in some way, or an awareness in some way that's been helpful?
I think a lot of us are, we're forced to work out strategies that work for our particular symptoms. A lot of us with chronic illness, like, we might have a diagnosis, but what those symptoms look like can be really variable, from one person to the next. So you kind of figure out what works for you. And particularly, we're really likely to have overlapping conditions that might kind of cause even more individual needs, or, the doctors might not have seen a grouping before, or a set of symptoms that come together before, and you kind of work out how those, I think, something that I've definitely learned is that the way I communicate with healthcare professionals has to also be really different, and I have to go into an appointment curious about the professional, the doctor, the nurse, whoever that I'm talking to, and like learning to gauge what they want from me. Their expectations of me as a patient has been a really big learning curve. So there's definitely some doctors. I had an appointment last week where the doctor was really kind and was like, he said, I really appreciate how educated you are about your conditions, about your symptoms, about your treatments. That makes my life a lot easier because I understand your picture, I understand your situation, and therefore understand like what plan we need to put in place and what care needs you have much more effectively. I've definitely had other consultants particularly who don't want me to be educated, don't want me to be kind of medically articulate, who will even kind of completely ignore the written details that I've given them about my situation, will completely ignore them because they're very much they know best. The patient is kind of passive in their eyes. The patient doesn't know anything. They just need to accept the care plan that particular consultant's going to come up with. And so I've learned to be more curious, not just about myself and my needs, but also about how I communicate those things. Because definitely in a medical context, the way a medic might want to kind of receive that information from me, whether I talk about just my symptoms or maybe I phrase things in terms of my priorities for care, you know, and will say my priorities are X, Y, and Z, or whether I know whether I'm going into an appointment and I know I have a particular outcome that I'd like. Sometimes I can be very direct about that. Sometimes I gauge that that's not the right way to go, and I kind of tailor what I say and how I answer questions so that the doctor gets round to that conclusion too. And it's like, oh, I think, have you tried this medication or this treatment? Because maybe that would work. And inside I'm like, oh, that's what I wanted to say. That I would have liked to have sat down and said, I'd like to try X, but that wasn't going to be well received. So I've kind of tailored how I talk about things and how I talk about myself so that we all get to the same conclusion. It's something that very much takes practice, and I don't always gauge it right, and some doctors are just going to be really difficult, whatever you say. But definitely in terms of being curious, that's definitely something I've learned, I think.
It's quite exhausting as well, like listening to that, exhausting in terms of gauging that, and or it sounds exhausting in terms of the energy that goes into that.
Yeah, and you can very much be going in with your own set of like nerves or anxieties or other things that both makes that even more exhausting, but also makes your communication more difficult. And we were asked about some strategies for talking to doctors, which I will talk about a bit later to cover that off too.
Charlotte, I don't want to put you on the spot in any way, shape or form, because you are physically more present in terms of everybody else is going to be watching this digitally at a later date. But is there anything that you wanted to contribute, but don't feel pressured? And remember, it's being recorded, so it's something that you not only feel comfortable sharing now, something that you'll be comfortable sharing with if somebody's watching this in a year's time, for example, or 2 years' time.
Yeah, that's fine. I just think sometimes communication I find quite difficult is the telephone consultations over the phone. Because I find with a lot of doctors, they don't give you enough airtime. It's like sometimes, like yesterday's telephone conversation was only 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
I've had a lot of concerns, and like one of my nurse specialists wrote to him, he hasn't received the letter, so I had to physically read the letter out to them. And then for him to say, oh, well, actually, it's not for me, you need to see a different specialist. It's a bit like I've been put on the spot here. And afterwards, I felt like that was a waste of time. And then I actually spoke to my nurse specialist after the call. You know, I was in tears because after all, I'm a young woman and I have got very complex health needs. And obviously I'm dyslexic as well. And I think what is so annoying, going back into education, the educational healthcare plan is for the under 25s. There is adults in education, and I do think that the educational healthcare plan should be extended for adults, because I think if I had like a one big document where everybody wrote in, you know, it would be so much easier for me sometimes to remember everything. And sometimes you're trying to engage with the doctors. Do they want to know this information, or this is only their speciality? And sometimes it's trying to find a rapport with people, and over the phone, yeah, it's quite hard to judge sometimes. Okay, you're not getting judged on your appearance. That's one thing, you know. The telephone call is quite good for that, but it is hard to engage, I think. And I think where I live in particular, there's not a lot of services around. I don't fit into that mold. I'm not a child. I'm not severely disabled. I'm not elderly. So where do I belong? There isn't a group for me, really. I don't belong to anybody. There isn't hardly any support groups because there isn't any funding for that particular group. So I have found like chronically awesome through Instagram. And, you know, I think it's been amazing finding this because, you know, it has helped me a lot. But a lot of you don't live in my area. So it is, you know, it is hard sometimes having that it would be nice to have that face-to-face contact with somebody who is similar to me, but it's not always available.
Charlotte, just so checking that I understood you right. So you had an 8-minute telephone for a conversation, and part of that telephone conversation, you had to read out a letter.
Yeah, it was 2-page long.
Wow.
And it's putting my reading skills, you know, to a test, because when you're nervous and reading out a letter and trying to get in the reading speed so that other person understood what I said. And
thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's why lived experience is just becoming so much, you know, it's focused on, and it's so important because these experiences just bring alive what our systems are and look like that we're using, and what the impact is for the individual. And also I wanted to say, with regards to the difficulties with services, we're going to be having lots of resources as well. So have a look at those. They're going to be resources of all about like advocacy, all different things. So hopefully you'll find some other bits and
thank you.
Useful. Thanks, Charlotte.
It's okay.
So in terms of not just we get to these spaces of what actually looks good for us as our well-being, and for each of us this is going to look so individual, and there's going to be times like, for example, I had a car accident where my recovery was for quite a few months, nearly half a year, and it was all about physio, and it was all about pain management, and it wasn't about anything else. So some of these things for that time frame I didn't get to do, but there were some parts that were still integral, that were really, really important to restore my well-being. So for me, music is just incredibly important. Again, that transition, like I did from here to there, in terms of doing research, music is amazing. I can either watch it visually on YouTube, or I can have my speakers. And even the fact of how I access music in those different ways can be really good transition. It's not only just a transition of setting a reset button, it's a transition in terms of creating like chunks of space or chunks of experiences, which really helps with my memory. And also it's getting more to that kind of like multi-sensory learning. So it's not only just like good for my well-being, that's good for me as my experience of being a neurodivergent person. I love stuff like, I've got a recycled bag, that's Poppy in the background, spending time with my nephew, so you'll see like a Lego piece there. I'm sure you don't want me to spend too much time on it, but I even just look at that and I'm like, yeah, that just even visually looking at that makes me feel really, really good. These moments that they're just there for me, or they're there in terms of like spending time with other people. And it's that getaway from, I guess, always feeling like immersed into something, or having like, I'm a natural deep thinker, having to process information that's just like, no, I'm not going to process any information. I just purely want to be in the moment. I purely want to focus on whatever those things are, and also accept myself at the times when I struggle to do that, struggle to switch off. we also, Reannon, who works for Chronically Awesome, also shared what she finds, what they find in inspiring. And yeah, there's lots going on there. There's the elements of being outdoors, there's things that are inside in terms of cats, there's family and friends. These things may just seem really I don't know, maybe basic to kind of focus on, but this is fundamentally what, you know, well-being looks like. If well-being is about contentment or happiness, or if it's about health, whatever that looks like, or whatever those things look like for us, it's going to be so individual to us what that looks like. So for example, if you're in a situation where that you are bedbound for massive periods of your life or massive periods of time, those things that restore you are going to look a particular, you know, a particular way, whether that's your audible that you're into, whatever that whatever those things are. Ellie, do you want to talk about your board?
Yeah, I think it, you know, it may seem like an odd thing to talk about, but actually like understanding the things that are important in your life can be really key when you are talking about your needs. Or, you know, I definitely, if my quality of life has taken a big step back, being able to talk about specific things that I've lost, that I'm unable to do at that time, is a really key way of communicating the severity sometimes of what I'm going through without just talking about symptoms. So recently I had to give up driving for a little bit, which given that I live quite rurally, was a really big, you know, really big loss of independence. And I was able to kind of say, look, I'm not able to take my dogs for a walk at the moment, even a short walk. I'm not able to drive to get to like activities or things. Were ways of communicating the steps back that I'd taken in a way that maybe a list of symptoms wouldn't have done. And I think made a really big difference when I was talking to doctors about kind of where I was at and what had changed from the last appointment. So like thinking about, you know, your needs and your strategies on what is really useful on one hand, but thinking about your well-being and what well-being looks like for you can also be a really important thing. And yeah, like, you know, sometimes, so for example, I like to go for a walk, I like to be outdoors. That's not always possible. So we filled our house with houseplants so that I can feel like I've brought outside and the countryside into the house. Literally, I mean, there's like 5 just on this windowsill here. Like they are everywhere in a house, and if they're not plants, there's pictures of leaves and things. But also you'll see one of the pictures is my husband and I in a kayak. What I realized that what I got out of walking was, 1, being outside, and 2, being time that was switched off from other things to just talk and take things at a slower pace. And so by getting a kayak, I fully admit I do not paddle. I have a paddle, I just don't really use it because I don't have the energy or the strength, but that's fine. My husband can paddle us around and I get that time outdoors. We can take the dogs with us, but it's a really accessible thing because I can essentially sit and do nothing while we chat and float around. And it's about kind of understanding of the things that you really enjoy doing, what elements of that do you enjoy, and how can you find other ways to bring that into your life if those activities aren't available to you. And that picture of me sitting on the beach was because I couldn't walk very far that day, but we still wanted to be to the beach. So we parked by the beach. I walked as far as the sea, well, not even that, as you can see, and then just plonked myself down, which meant the dogs could run around, have their walk, come back for cuddles occasionally, and I could enjoy the fresh air and the sunshine without it having to be a full-blown 10-mile hike, which was definitely not doable at that time. So it's kind of understanding your well-being is as important as understanding your needs, I think.
I like that as well, what you said when it's about as well what that well-being actually means to you. This idea that the word well-being, that it's all the same to us. It's like the subjectiveness of what success looks like. Success all looks different to each one of us, and well-being looks different to each one of us as well.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go for it, Charlotte.
So I think, you know, I went through, I don't know if you ever heard this, Kubler-Ross grief process. I went through all of that circle, and I grieved for my old life for a while, because I was like, when I had my pacemaker, I was a bit in despair that, you know, wow, I've got something, this is going to be in my chest for the rest of my life, and this is going to keep me alive. And it's trying to be a young person, and like when the doctors say, "Oh, just go back and enjoy yourself," and then it's like, this is when all my other health problems started kicking in, and there's me trying to do my old life and actually failing miserably. And like I used to do ballet, and I actually kept my ballet stuff in a cupboard for 3 years, and a couple of weeks ago I went to the British Heart Foundation, and I took a big bin liner and said, there's like old costumes in here, there's leotards, there's shoes. But when I was washing up all those leotards, I was crying, because I've been at the YMCA since I was 3 years old. So, and I used to do all the little shows and activities there, and it's like a big chunk of my life, and it was hard to say goodbye. But now I've replaced, like I started doing art, and I started doing craft stuff. So I'm starting to learn new things about myself. And some days I'm better than other days. And I've joined different groups which are like more accommodating for my needs now. I'm not doing gym bunny classes anymore. I do like one on Zoom on a Friday lunchtime. And to be fair, there's more elderly people than youngsters. But it's at my level. And then last Friday, it was just me and the teacher. But, you know, it's working what is best for me.
So what I get from that, Charlotte, is that you've almost had to go through a full grieving and a full grieving process to get to the stage where you're at now of seeing, actually, this also makes me happy, and this is also something that I can do. It's not just a thing that kind of happens overnight, is what I take.
Yeah, it is. And I think also the doctors don't prepare you for this. It's like when I got my pacemaker, I had like the picture of it had a man with a Zimmer frame. He was like in his 80s. I was like, and I actually phoned at the British Heart Foundation in tears saying, what can I do? What can I do in life? I don't know what to do. What can't do now? And it's like, this booklet is not really appropriate for me. And I said, is there any literature for a younger person? And she said, there isn't actually.
And which is, Charlotte, that is classic of the fact that we sometimes don't fit into these kind of box exercises, or we don't fit into these simple exercises. So the simplicity of that is, okay, if statistically a certain age group of people will have this, so this is what the brochure is going to look like, and the situation that you find yourself in is actually, what inspiration or what information can I take from this? It is something actually adapted in a way that you know, they're conversations to have, because there's a possibility that you could have looked at that, you could have felt in your grieving cycle even more kind of even more low, or even more stuck in a situation than and we all grieve in terms of like difference. There's no right or wrong way about this. But, and again, the other thing that I don't know if I'm interpreting you right, that could have been a barrier, that could have been a stopping point in terms of when you're saying, well, what can I do? This is my life. I'm a young person. What can I actually do now? And having those opportunities and those things that are around you that can support you to thrive, or support you to be able to maintain your
It is. I think what is hard, right, when I got given the cardiac community nurse, I don't see her anymore, but the comment when she first like came to me is like, oh, I don't see young people like you. And I was like, wow, I need help. I don't know what to do.
I definitely recognize myself like having a hip replacement at the age of 30. Like hip replacements are generally something you have when you're old, and all the other people that were in for hip replacements that day or knee replacements were all old. You know, not going to sugarcoat it. You know, certainly not anywhere close to my age. And I just felt like when I was being handed like my Zimmer frame for my initial recovery and, you know, my raised toilet seat and all that sort of thing, I was like, God, this just like, I feel like I've got into my 80s. And when I Googled like how to prepare, it was all for people who were older. And so I actually ended up writing my own like guide. But I think on the topic of grief, like there's almost two sets of grief that you go through, or there certainly was for me. There was grief for the life that I'd lost, that I was already living. There's also grief for like the potential that I'd lost, that I felt like I'd lost. Like I had this idea of what my career was going to be, and I was like, okay, now I can't have that career anymore. I like, for me, the bigger grieving process, I think, was almost all the things that I perceived I'd lost, because I couldn't see what I might have gained at that point. And certainly something that in terms of kind of Chronically Awesome going into a mental health offering next, I definitely want to look at like a set of counselling or like resources or whatever it might look like that's kind of at the point of diagnosis that helps people in terms of like their diagnostic journey and what they might have gone through, but also that grief process, because it is, I was the same, I went through all of those stages. And I think what's different for us as well is that while grief for a lot of people is about something that's happened to someone else, or like it can be sort of quite outside of themselves, you're also battling feeling physically awful. In my case, I like lost my job at the same time because of my ill health. Like you're not just going through it emotionally, you're going through it very physically, sometimes financially, and like that's an incredible amount of stuff to go through.
It is, it's hard. It's like with me going back
to colleges.
Yeah, it's like me go back into education, trying to explain to them I've got ill health retirement. I'm technically a pensioner. And for them, like, but you're 35. I was like, yeah, I'm on a pension. And they couldn't grasp that concept. And they're like, so why do you want to come and retrain it? Come and do this course? Like, because I want to retrain so then I can go back out there and get another job.
Yeah, your life's not over.
Yeah.
I think that's something we have to, like, a lot of us have to learn. Like these diagnoses don't mean our life's over. It might have changed. It might look really different temporarily, but that like you will adjust and find new things. Can feel like a really, like, it's quite hard to tell someone that though, I think. Certainly if someone had come up to me at my first diagnosis and been like, don't worry, you'll find a whole new path in life, I would have been like, get out of my face.
You just that's the thing, it's quite hard to understand sometimes. It takes a few days, maybe a few months to fully accept what's going on, and sometimes you've got to sort of say to yourself, it's okay to have a bad day, it's okay to feel like this, don't punish yourself. But what you achieved yesterday, you did amazingly. And what you're going to do tomorrow is going to be equally as good.
It's really helpful listening to you, Charlotte and Ellie, because when from a co-learning experience and bereavement, I had worked quite hard in terms of studying. That was a degree that took 3 years to study, and was really excited about my career prospects, and having the need to feel like I had to talk a bit more about my neurodiversity to access systems or for people to understand me within a workplace, and the impact of not being understood, the impact of not having access to reasonable adjustments was a massive contributor to me having my physical and mental burnout. And there was such bereavement and grief that was in that, because for 1 minute I'd had this, like, this lanyard and this thing that you pull around, and feeling all this kind of identity that goes on with that work that I'd felt like I'd worked so hard to achieve. And then kind of hitting a wall where you realize that whatever you do in that scenario, there are bigger systems that are going on where people are struggling to access some of the basic things that they need. And again, it's not a kind of like pointing fingers and a blame culture. I think what that made me aware of was how often people are struggling to get into situations like accessing employment or accessing education, and there is a bereavement. And Ellie, you spoke earlier about the different things that you found our friendship has sort of supported and helped with, and I felt exactly the same when I met you. So me and Ellie met each other on a we both got a scholarship for our organisations, which is wonderful. That's how we met. And part of the transition that I was really struggling with is going from a situation where you're classed as a professional in terms of being able to, advocate and being able to do the different things that the impact that I wanted to have, and then being in a situation because I hadn't been in a scenario where I could access the things that I needed. It's now, well, where do I fit now? How do I use my degree now? Am I still valid? Do I still have a place? And I think it's really awesome that we're in a situation where more lived experiences not only being talked about, but you're seeing people that are, in situations where we're leading organisations and that we're all kind of co-learning together. Charlotte?
Yeah.
The next part of this is about taking a pause, taking out about 10 minutes just to think about what are all those things that you find helpful for your well-being. So if it's somebody you think, yeah, I know exactly what those things
I'll probably have to list them.
Yeah. What I'm going to do, I'm going to give you time, because that gives us all a really nice well-being break. We'll take 10 minutes and then we'll come back.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
It's so inspiring, I think, or some people really hate that word. I just wondered in that moment whether I hated it as well. I felt it. It can be really helpful if people can see other examples. So that's really wonderful.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Fine.
I'll see you in 10 minutes.
See you in 10.
Bye.
Being recorded.
What we're capturing right now is some beautiful technical issues.
Everyone see that if I'm scrolling through?
Yeah, I can see it.
Great.
Charlotte, whilst Ellie is sort of the presentation, what sort of things came to mind for you for your work with regards to your well-being and the things that you find supportive?
So I think I quite like reading books, because that's quite an escapism. Friends who are not toxic. So people who understand me fully, because I have got friends who I no longer speak to because they weren't doing me any good in the end. And I sort of had to divorce that friendship.
You touched on something that we're going to be talking about later as well, so it's quite helpful that that's come up really naturally.
And Instagram support groups, I find, like connecting with people who've got similar conditions is life-changing. It's nice to know that I'm not on my own. Taking time for myself, listen to my body, don't push myself just because I should be doing that because I'm 35. No, you've got to listen to yourself and take my time. Music, I love Spotify. I love it all the time. I think music is like quite inspiring, and I think it's good to help you with your mood. I like doing painting because I think painting's like quite therapeutic, and like if you're having a bad day, I think painting something, it's quite nice. It's quite relaxing. And I just think, like my cat Daisy, she has been a life changer. I think, having her around, she's a great companion. She doesn't judge me. And I think animals have that unconditional love. And she just gets me. And you know, she has her funny little ways. I have my own little funny ways. So we make a good, you know, good partnership. And I think animals have got that. They just got that sense around them, haven't they? They just know how to give affection and not be nasty to you. And sometimes it's quite nice to have that.
And they're meant to be really good for our like in terms of like our bodies as well. Like we know it's a really physical or physiological interaction that animals have with us as well. Thank you for sharing that.
That's fine.
How's it going, Ellie, with the presentation? Is it still sort of frozen?
Can you not see it?
I can see it, but I can see it on neurodiversity and chronic illness on the first slide.
Oh, bring your shared window to the front. I don't know what that means. I'm on the right slide on my thing.
Oh, this is I love technology. There'll be people watching this probably laughing and going, oh, what's she going to do? Now, does she know her presentation well? We're about to find out, people. Ellie or anybody, do you mind telling me what slide that you're on?
Setting your parameters.
Fantastic. So the second, I love the, it feels like a challenge in itself. So setting the parameters was another practical tip that we wanted to talk about. So Hidden Capacities and Chronically Awesome have collaborated, and we've looked at, and this is one way that you can set your parameters. So in terms of like emails, your email handle. So on my email handle, it talks about a flexible working, but it also talks about awareness raising, about increasing text size. So for me, having access to size 14, a larger text font can help in terms of visual stress, and it allows me not to fatigue as quick when doing the things that I want to do. We've looked at, they've taken inspiration from all over, and they're going to be out on Chronically Awesome's Instagram. Ellie, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of that part? Doesn't matter if not, because I'll go on to the next bit.
No, all good, thanks.
Also, another thing in terms of like setting parameters, so for example, you can take Hidden Capacities. We've only recently come on to social media as a digital platform. That's because in the past I found it quite difficult in terms of the internet's a really beautiful place where we can feel connection, but it's also a place where we can feel absolutely immersed, overwhelmed. As a deep thinker, when I look at short videos, for me, I often have lots of questions. Also, because of my high empathy, I can struggle to watch things that are immersive in terms of how that makes me feel in terms of inside my body, or worry, if that makes sense. So from a parameters perspective, what that looks like for me as a founder, and what that looks like in terms of Hidden Capacities, because there is an interlink between what looks, what looks and is sustainable. Parameters are set in terms of digital as well as like physical. In terms of physical, those parameters, I can really relate to you, Charlotte, when you were talking about how some relationships you identified as being toxic, and one of, or a big massive shift that I've noticed within my life that has become more and more essential and more important is to be around people that get me, is to be around people that understand. And that can be really hard. That can be so hard to come away from environments, or come away from people that are actually either purposely or sometimes unintentionally creating harm. One of the slides that you saw previously there, he is he's Dutch, and he has his own Instagram account. And the reason why I was interested in this is that when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And I think within our communities, we can sometimes be in positions where we're made to feel like we are the person with the issue, or the person with the problem, or the person that needs to put in a strategy to be able to mold yourself so that you're more acceptable in some way. And that can be exhausting. That can be so exhausting. And a lot of the Instagram accounts and awareness that's being raised is that people are being honest with, actually, this is how I process information, or this is what I need. And it's something that, even if it's a fluctuating thing that happens, it's something that I can't negotiate. In terms of resources, because there's different levels of toxicity. So you can have a toxicity in terms of relationship where someone's being unintentionally not having an awareness of the damage that is being created, or the difficulties that you can have with your own well-being. But then there's also relationships or situations that are more they're more safeguarding issues, or they're more situations where people may need resources, or may need protection or support. So we're also going to be covering that in terms of the resources that we make people aware of, and we hope that you find that useful. The one part, Ellie, going on to the toxicity slide, that I wanted to mention, and I've been talking about, is sometimes that people can be harmful, but it is unintentional. It's not an intentional thing that they go out and go, right, today I'm going to make this person's life really difficult. And an example of that I can give to you, which I keep coming back to, just because I think it's a good example, is if you have high empathy, sometimes being around others that, and also having high emotional intelligence, being around other people that, for whatever reason, might want to kind of create games or create challenges, and or even, there's a lot of research that is available in terms of people that have high empathy. And one of the things that is noticed is that we can sometimes become like doormats to other people. And it's not necessarily because they are being nasty people. What can happen is, by having really high empathy and prioritizing other people's emotions and well-beings, we become just like puppets. We become manipulated, and we become what other people want us to be and want us to do. And identifying that and seeing that is really important. So on the one hand, high empathy is identified as like a neurodiverse gift, or a gift that is a processing which is in both of our communities, but also there can be difficulties that happen as well because of that. So sometimes these toxic relationships or environments that we can end up in aren't necessarily because people are, how to word it, not necessarily because people are intentional, but I guess the question is, does it still have an impact? Is it still having an impact on your well-being? So some relationships you might be able to minimize or come away from, and there'll be others that actually this is having such a detriment on either your health or your well-being that coming away from those relationships completely might be the option that you need to go for. And again, we'll make sure that you have access to all the different resources that are available to support you with that if you're watching this and you're finding yourself in that situation. You're right to do. Yay! So co-created accessibility. So Ellie's going to be talking about practical tips in terms of accessing environments that in terms of like health, or in terms of appointments. But co-created accessibility looks at what can we as well be bringing to a situation. So there is lots of positive things going on at the moment, and have been going on. So if you look at, for example, if this organization isn't on your radar, I'd highly check them out. If you look at Genius Within, the founder is really passionate about systematic inclusion, and systematic inclusion is doing things automatically where you're thinking about inclusion from the start. So for example, not waiting until somebody asks you, can I have live captions, just doing it, just providing that in the first place. And what that does is lots of different things. It communicates to other people that difference and inclusion is thought about and it's not token. It can also help people that if they may have experienced a barrier where they felt like they had to identify that they had a need in some way, that can stop that in terms of a lot of people being able to access something without having to identify that they have a need. Also in situations where somebody or an organization hasn't quite got it in terms of what you need as an individual, because we are so different, it opens up that conversation or cultures that it's okay to be different. It's okay to have different needs and work in different styles and process in different styles. And yeah, I wanted to say that because that is having an impact, because there are organizations that are looking at not being token and just embedding in inclusion, just really embedding it. So co-created accessibility kind of moves on as well from that and talks about the fact that in situations we are quite we're quite powerful as well in terms of what we can bring and how accessibility can be changed in terms of, so say for example, go back to the curiosity. Now that I know that I need transitions in terms of movement, I can be doing that for myself. I don't need somebody potentially to give me permission. I can just do that when that need is there, and when that makes yeah, it's about the co-creation of, we have systems, but we also have us as individuals, and it's really tricky. It's one that people could probably talk about forever, because there is a real shift away from not needing strategies and completely and fully being ourselves. And then also there's an interlink there that completely and fully being myself is to be able to move, is to be able to wander. I've also been in situations of like training and workshops where I've just made the person aware, I have dyslexia, I would like to move, that helps me with my concentration, and most people have responded quite positively to that. There can be situations where people aren't aware of maybe why that you've just randomly, got up and decided to move or gone to a different space, or what appears random to other people. There's lots of things to consider, I guess, about empowering ourselves to be able to feel comfortable and just do the things that help us be at our best. And then also for accepting or not being so critical on ourselves when we haven't quite managed to create that accessibility in the way that we wanted. Yeah, I think this is a deeper conversation to have, but hopefully that's helpful. Ellie, did you want to talk us through the practical tips that you had?
Yeah, so oh, this is going to let me go back one. So something that I wanted to raise, so I will send out these slides as well. So Ree's already talked about the email footers that we've got as something that can help set expectations about how you communicate and how quickly you're going to reply to people. Something else that is in terms of appointment specifically, so the National Institute for Care and Health Excellence, that's probably the wrong set of words, NICE, who set the guidelines for how the NHS works in England, have recently come out with new guidelines on shared decision making. So essentially, as it sounds, the way that decisions are made between patients and their healthcare professionals. And it was really clear about laying out what should happen before, during and after a discussion. And some of these, I think, aren't, like, a lot of them aren't routine, but knowing that these are the guidelines, knowing that this is how appointments should look, is a really great way of bringing in some adaptations and saying, actually, like, this is what I'm entitled to, these are what the guidelines are, therefore I'm going to employ these things. So, as NICE puts it, before a discussion, and you can write these down, you could create a spider diagram, you could create voice notes for yourself, but you're encouraged to think about, and we've talked about this a bit, what matters to you. So, you know, what is your well-being? What would you like to improve so that you get back some of the things that you've maybe lost? What are your priorities? Think about what you hope will happen. And we've talked about how you get to the what you hope will happen bit can sometimes be changeable, and what questions you'd like to ask. So, you know, a lot of the time the appointment itself isn't the beginning point. How you prepare for that appointment can be really important, and you can take in written notes if you wanted to. If you wanted to have a big piece of paper that says these are my priorities, these are what I want to say, that could be really important. Reid, did you want to?
Yeah, I've also known people that have done it as in video as well, Ellie. So people that struggle maybe with anxiety or being able to have face-to-face conversations, they have filmed themselves, and then that's been their discussion. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and as this slide says, you're also entitled to have someone in an appointment with you, and that is during COVID as well, and also applies to like telephone, video appointments. It doesn't matter what the form of the appointment is. You can have a family, friend, carers. It doesn't. You can have a nurse or a social worker, interpreter, a volunteer advocate. Whoever you feel will help you make a shared decision. Make a shared decision, and that can look like helping you communicate what you want and what you need. It can look like helping you process information during an appointment. It could also help, you know, having someone else with you can help you remember what happened in an appointment, which we'll come on to. So you also don't have to do these things alone. And it's completely your right to have someone in an appointment with you. So it's kind of beforehand. During, they say that there should be, you should have an agenda with how long, you know, prioritizing what you want to discuss, how long a discussion will last, which feels a little bit formal and a little bit kind of meeting-y for some people, but can also be really useful if you want to know if you're feeling quite anxious and you want to know what to expect out of an appointment. Ask for that at the beginning. Say, you know, I make a point if I'm feeling really anxious of saying, I'm feeling really anxious and this is why, so that they understand where I'm coming from as well. Again, there's this emphasis on what matters to you and your needs and preferences, and something that there's also a responsibility on our part to be able to talk about those things. A doctor can't, you know, a doctor doesn't know what your priorities are or what your needs and preferences are unless you are able to tell them in some way, whatever way is most appropriate for you. They can't guess that from looking at you, and will probably get it wrong if they try. So, you know, think if you've done a little bit of research and you know maybe what the options are for tests and treatments, have a think about what your preference is and why, so that you can talk about those things in the appointment, because they're, you know, when you're talking about tests and treatments, it can often be a lot of information in a short amount of time. So if you've done a little bit of preparation, you know what might be brought up, you'll be better prepared to say, this is the one I think I want to go to and why, and in terms of your preferences and your needs. Yeah, Ree?
Ellie, I've noticed as well, like when I choose to share something in terms of wanting to talk about my being neurodivergent, I've noticed that I've been getting more specific as well with what that means. So I think before, when I said those words, I made the assumption that other people would know what that meant like for me. And actually when I've had those conversations, what I'm faced with is whatever they think that is, or whatever they think that means. So that's been really helpful as well. I've noticed when I felt overwhelmed or not being accessed, like a call center, when going through all the security questions and then experiencing memory recall difficulties and not being able to remember simple things like a postcode, and as an example, getting really into the specifics of what I need from that individual as well, I found has been really helpful. So just wanted to add that.
And as this says, you know, if you've been able to express your needs and preferences, then a healthcare professional can then present options that most or least suit those preferences, and should be talking about, you know, this treatment will align with your aims, priorities and goals. They should also be talking about, you know, and you can ask if they don't bring this up, the risks and benefits and consequences of each option. And options can include choosing not to be treated or not to change the treatment you're having, which often isn't put on the table as an option, and is really important to remember that you can choose to continue along the path you're on or to stop treatment. That's completely fine as well, and you should be supported in those decisions. And the professional should be able to should you know, ideally a professional will be able to repeat back to you what your priorities are, and set aside enough time to answer your questions. I've got a really great doctor who at the end of an appointment will sum up what I've said and where I'm at and what I want to happen, sum up the options that we talked about, which one we went for and why, and then at the next appointment, say like we've made a decision to pursue a treatment plan, at the next appointment when we start that treatment plan, as well as having sent a letter in between that sums everything up, at the next appointment he'll say, this is what we decided to do and why. Are you still happy for that to happen? Do you have any additional questions? It's really important that discussion should be continuous. The guidelines specifically state patients should be given the time they need to make decisions. And, you know, Charlotte, you mentioned a really short appointment. I've definitely had one with a rheumatologist that was 3 minutes, 40 seconds. It said it because it was on a video call. You know, that's not enough time for anything, to communicate anything, to ask any questions, to process anything. What's also really important is these guidelines say that professionals need to accept and acknowledge that people may vary their views about the balance of risks and benefits, and that a patient's perspective may differ from the perspective of the healthcare professional. I think when there's been a lack of alignment in the past, the default has been to go for whatever the healthcare professional feels is right. That doesn't have to happen. And so by the time you get to the end of your discussion, there should be a joint decision and plan that's something that you feel comfortable with. And something that made me really angry recently was that our health minister, Nadine Dorries, said that where women are uncomfortable with their treatment plans, they need to go back and demand a different treatment plan. That is not the way it should be. You should be comfortable with your treatment plan before it starts. You need to be comfortable before the end of the appointment, not having to go back and change it because you were uncomfortable from the beginning. You can always review your decision and change your mind at any time. It doesn't have to wait until the next appointment. You can make decisions about your care at any point. And your healthcare professional should be recording these decisions. If you don't feel like they are recording things accurately or appropriately, if you've had experience of someone, or if it helps you remember these things, record. There's nothing against you taking your phone in with a voice recorder on it and recording the whole appointment, so that you feel like you have something to fall back on. If the letters are so often completely incorrect. You know, you have something to fall back on that says that's not what we discussed, or that's not the way you presented the options to me. Or if it just helps you remember, you know, if there's been a lot of information in an appointment, having a recording that you can listen back to is completely okay, and a healthcare professional should be okay with you. They should, you know, some may get defensive, that's their problem, not yours. And then you should get a post-clinic letter that sums up what was discussed and what's been agreed. Apparently you should be offered resources in your preferred format, and that should include information about who to contact with further questions. This is something that was often left off, is how to contact your specialist or your consultant or whoever you've seen in between appointments. So if you want to ask and say, how do I get in touch with you if I have more questions, that is something you're entitled to do, and can be a really important part of an appointment. Because so often we walk away and think, oh, I wish I'd said that, or I wish I'd asked that question. You have a right to do that in between appointments. Your clinical letter should actually come to you and be addressed to you rather than to your GP. It should just be copied to your GP. It shouldn't be, I saw this person and this happened. It should be, I saw you today and we discussed this and this was what was decided. And you can also say you don't want a letter if you prefer. If you find them difficult to read or anything, you can say you don't want one. If you are likely to need extra help, you should be offered that help, and you can also ask for it. So you can ask for them to explain things in writing, the decisions that were made. You can ask for it to be a really detailed letter. They're often quite brief and kind of an overview. You can ask for it to be more thorough. You can ask to have a follow-up appointment with them, or maybe with like a specialist nurse or someone to go over and you can say, so I saw my physio yesterday and I called him up and said, I can't remember what we said in our last appointment because it was just before I went into hospital. Can we have another appointment that's just revising what happened, because I can't wait till the next one. You know, if I wait till the next one, I'm just going to have got nowhere. I want to have made progress, so can we have a revision appointment? So those are kind of some really simple things. The other thing that I will send around that I'll briefly show you, I've got it up. Where are we? I will send around, someone specifically before this asked for, let me share that screen again. Ask for tips for talking to doctors, and that can be really, really difficult. Particularly if you want to push back and say, I don't agree with what you're saying, or I don't like that option. I've actually got a set of slides with 20 different ways of saying, like pushing back, whether that's that you've got a second opinion, or you want to ask whether there are other pathways that you might explore, whether you're like, I'm in a position where I've got two consultants that are disagreeing with each other, and I feel caught in the middle, how you talk to a doctor about that. So we've got loads of different like literally sentences that you could use when communicating with a doctor that might be useful. So I will send those around with this presentation as well, because I'm not going to like list out 20 sentences. Just as a quick one, the email signatures again. So this is email signatures you can use at the bottom of an email to set expectations. We've got loads of them to choose from. So like you should be able to find something that suits you or that you can adapt. So we've got loads of slides for those.
Sometimes, Ellie, I involve them as well. Like I kind of gauge a response and think, oh, how effective has this been? Is anybody actually coming back to me in a size text font that is accessible to me, and kind of having a play with what that looks like as well. So it's really awesome to evolve it as well.
Cool. So hopefully I'll be able to get back into this. So that was everything I was gonna say, but as I said, everything will be sent out, so don't worry about if I whistle stop through anything and you want to check back. Those slides about shared decision making, there are other slides around those that give context and that sort of thing. And
they're going to be future Instagram posts as well?
The shared decision making and the pushing back against doctors are already up on our social media. The email footers will go out imminently.
So the next slide is focusing on the fact that sometimes when we're going through these difficulties, whether that's because we've found a situation, we're coming away from relationships or environments that we're finding really difficult, that can be really hard. If we are advocating for ourselves and negotiating or looking at the different ways that we want to communicate, and sometimes that can have a positive effect, and maybe we're in situations where that hasn't had a positive effect, and there's still adjustments that we've needed to explore or look at, that at times can make us feel so isolated as individuals, or can have a tendency. And one of the things that I really wanted to stress, and I guess Charlotte, you've also mentioned as well that you found useful, is that there are spaces and there are people that, if you look at our communities, we are so vast. We're not we're not a pocket. The chronic illness community and the neurodiverse community, we are huge if you bound us together, basically. And I just wanted to say that in those moments, if you are in a situation where you're feeling alone or feeling overwhelmed, reach out. There's loads of us here, there's loads of us, and we're all going through the same thing, sometimes very similar, sometimes different, and we're all on these individual journeys where we're getting used to what language we want to use to identify who we are as people. We're all evolving, we're all at different stages within our journey. Just wanted to say that also in terms of being together, there is lots of different resources, as Ellie's already put out there. There's different organisations that support with advocacy, and that will be sent out. Charlotte, is there any questions or anything that you wanted to add before we finish today? And there's no pressure if there isn't.
Oh, that's it. Sorry, beg your pardon. Oh. But yeah, I just think it's nice to know that I'm not on my own. And it is difficult trying to find your own journey. And I think we are amazing people, aren't we, really? We are warriors. We have to put up with a lot of things, and a lot of people don't understand. And I think sometimes a little bit of kindness goes a long way. And I've appreciated what I've listened to this afternoon. It's a lot of information, but there's things where I could actually, like when you were saying about being inclusive, it's actually made me think about how I'm going to plan my lessons, like do my lesson planning. And it's like, oh, actually, yes, I should actually put fonts and maybe put a few images in, for this. Students are going to learn differently. We're all not going to fit on the same piece of paper. So yeah, that has made me think for teaching in practice. That'd be quite a good idea. So thank you for that tip.
Thank you for your contributions today as well, because it's a really it's a brave thing to be recorded and go out on the internet. And the fact that you've done that today, there's going to be people that you may meet in the future or not meet, but the fact that you've brought your examples today will have an impact. So thank you as well.
You're welcome.
Holly, is there anything you wanted to say before we fly off into the distance? What's really interesting is I think Ellie might be experiencing internet issues, which I'm really glad that happened at the end. Oh, you're there, Ellie. I think one of the things we've demonstrated today is we can certainly overcome any technical issues between us, which is a wonderful thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ellie, I'm not sure if there's anything else that you wanted to say, but I think that I'm just double checking before we go that it's not on the chat. Well, thanks so much for your contributions today, Charlotte. And
Okay.
if people that are watching this in the future, if there's anything that you think, oh, I'm not quite sure about that, or there's any information that you want and that you don't have access to, you're more than welcome to get in contact with myself and Ellie. That information will be made available. Thanks very much for your time. And Charlotte, it was really awesome meeting you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice meeting you too. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you. Bye, Ellie, if you can hear us.
Bye.
Bye.